All right, guys, so today is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. So I'm about to get started on Steve's car today. I didn't really do a whole lot yesterday. I quit kind of early yesterday because the heat was so bad. The worst part about yesterday on the heat, there's usually a breeze that crosses through this carport, and it's not too bad. I mean, it is bad, but it's not as bad. But yesterday there was nothing, like no breeze at all coming through. So it was a killer, man. So anyway, I ended up quitting pretty early in the afternoon, like normally than I'd want to. And it drives me crazy because I go in the house and I have nothing to do. So I go stir crazy. You know what I mean? Like all I want to do is work on the cars. So anyway, I got out here a little bit earlier this morning. I'm going to get started, but I got Steve's chassis primered yesterday, and I didn't get it all primered because I ran into a little bit of a problem, just a little one. So when he brought me the chassis, I asked him if he picked up the primer, and he said he hadn't got it yet. So he's actually getting it from his local O'Reilly's in his town because his boss, the place he works for, they have an account there, so he can get it pretty good deal on it from them. So anyway, he didn't bring me primer, and I wanted to go ahead and get this thing primered. I was going to wait until I got the engine mounts and the body mounts on and all that stuff, and I just don't want to leave it out here bare, you know what I mean? We don't have any rain scheduled for the rest of the week, but anyway, I just didn't want to, you know, have it get all surface rusted up or nothing. So I told him it was not a big deal because I had a gallon of Rust Defender in my house. So it's funny, I go in there to get that gallon can yesterday, and there's only half a gallon. I forgot I used a half of that. So this is only a half a gallon of the Rust Defender on here, and that stuff, if you've never shot it, it is transparent. So you'll put a couple coats on and you'll still have areas that look thin, but the stuff is on there. It's only when you get 3-4 heavy coats on is when you start noticing it's all yellow, which I did up in here on this front area because I want this up here to block out flat. So pretty much all of the chassis, this is the, you know, it's upside down, so all of the bottom is done and the sides are done, but the top, I just didn't have any primer to put on it, which is not a big deal. But yesterday I went through with my nylon cut brush, my big one on my buffer, and I did the whole chassis, just the top and the sides and everything. And you know, went in and worked all the areas. In case you don't know, if you have a chassis blasted or any raw metal part that you blast, anywhere your bare hands touch it, it ends up making rust spots there. It's from like the moisture or the acid or whatever's in your oil or whatever's in your fingers. But anyway, there was fingerprints all over this chassis, like everywhere. So I ended up doing a nylon cut brush and getting it all off of there. And then it took me, I'll bet you I spent 30 minutes blowing this chassis out. It was full of sand. That's the other thing that my blaster that I normally use does. He will actually blow. He's got big old long tubes, you know, blow nozzles, attachments to put on his air hose. And when he's done blasting it, he will blow it all out for you. So, you know, pretty awesome. But this thing was packed full of sand. So when I got done, it was a huge mess in the driveway. So before I swept it all up and then blew the driveway off, I went in and blasted all of the areas with my little portable blaster, like in the back and everything. Everything that they didn't get blasted, I went in and done with my little blaster. So I made even a bigger mess out here. Then I swept everything up and then blew it off with my leaf blower. So anyways, it's just a huge mess. But anyway, there's 2 coats on the back half, but there's technically 3 up in here, up on these sides and everything, and up in here and all of that, because I want this front frame stub to look really nice. Maybe not necessarily the very bottom of this right here, because you're never going to see it unless you climb into the car, but I want that top and the sides to look mint on this front stub area, especially when the hood's open. But anyway, where I removed the body mounts, it looks fantastic. Even over here, it looks really nice. So pretty pleased, man. It's going to look really great. But you know, there's going to be more welding and stuff to do on this chassis. I've got to weld the hardtop body mounts on. So what I'll end up doing is I'll sand the paint off to bare metal in the area I'm going to put the body mount on, so it'll feather edge that area. And then when I go back to, you know, primer the top of it and everything, I'll do all of that. So that's kind of my new plan. So the only thing I didn't get primer is the very top of the frame rails. So not a big deal. It'll be easy for me to clean up because it's not a big, you know, whole bunch of stuff as if doing all three sides, you know, it was. But. So I think today I'm going to start ripping this thing apart. I've got to really strip this car apart here. I've got to get the engine and trans out of it. I get the front clip off of it. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the front clip off first, but I'm gonna pull the engine trans after the front clip's out of the way. It'll just be easier. You know, I can get the cherry picker right up in there and hoist it up out of there. I'm wanting to have this frame all painted and a lot of the stuff done before I pull the chassis out from under his car, because I don't want the car sitting on concrete blocks and 4x4 posts for a week. You know what I mean? It may end up being that way, but I don't want it to be, is what I'm saying. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to see what all kind of hardware stuff I have here that I can use in place of some of his stuff. But I may have a brand new pair of grade 8 bolts to put in this forward eye bushing up here for the leaf spring. I've got a whole bunch of grade 8 hardware, lots of big bolts, lots of long bolts. So I'm going to look and see if I got some brand new grade 8s to put in there. But anyway, I got to do brake lines, fuel lines. I got to do a bunch of stuff to this frame, but anyway, I've got quite a bit of work to do. So, man, this turned into a huge job, you know, other than just, you know, finalizing stuff, putting the bumpers on it, getting the windows adjusted, and getting it running and driving. It's turned into a big mess. But I got to tell you, when he gets in this car to drive it, he is going to be blown away. These cars, I don't care what anybody says, I've drove these cars. I had several 55 Chevys that was my only daily driver. Like, it wasn't me calling it a daily driver and still only drove it on the weekends. It was the only car I had. So to go to work, do everything I needed to do, that was the only car I had. I had like 3 of those 55s at different times that I used them as my real deal daily drivers. And I got to tell you, when they are stock height and, you know, all the suspensions replaced and rebuilt and all that kind of stuff, the bushings and everything, these cars drive and ride fantastic, in my opinion. The only thing that I don't care about in an original Tri-5 Chevy is the steering gear ratio in the box. It's very slow, so you have to turn the steering wheel several times to get it to turn into like a parking spot. But to me, it's part of the old car experience, and I don't mind that. That's why I usually leave the stock steering box stuff on my cars. It doesn't bother me at all not to have power steering. I don't care. I'm not a weakling. I can turn a steering wheel, you know what I mean? So anyway, as far as if you have not ever messed with suspension, and this is where I think a lot of the stuff, where this topic comes up, we'll say, a lot of guys that's never had a Tri-5 Chevy before, they'll drag one in and they'll get it, you know, kind of just throw it together, get it running and driving, and it's, you know, wore out suspension parts and crap, wore out steering box, and then they complain that they drive and ride like crap. So at that point, all they want to do is buy an aftermarket chassis. So in my opinion, when you rebuild your front end with all new bushings and ball joints and all that kind of stuff and new shocks, and either put new leaf springs on the back, this is a big deal. The leaf springs are a big deal. If you buy new ones, or at least try to rebuild your old ones and put the new plastic sliders in there, you will be amazed how well these cars drive down the highway. These cars will put you to sleep driving them. I know this for a fact. So anyway, they float. I mean, they like the old saying goes, it rides like a Cadillac. That's the way they kind of ride, but that is with all replaced old crap. You know, you drive down the road with a wore out steering box and wore out tie rods and ball joints and air and bushings, yeah, it's probably going to ride and drive like crap. But you got to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges, you know what I mean? But he's going to be amazed, because the sliders, the plastic sliders, they're always gone. They always wear out and they're gone. And then at that point, your leaf spring becomes metal on metal. All those leaf springs, the separate little leaf packs in there, there's nylon sliders at each end, and when those are gone, it starts going metal on metal. Well, the more the car's driven, they start digging, the ends of those leaf pieces will dig into the main leaves, the other leaves above them, and it will dig a trench in there. So when you get to driving it, when the suspension's trying to work, it's hitting that trench and digging in and then popping up like a little speed bump. So it makes them not ride that well. But when you go in there with like a flap wheel on a grinder and take your leaf springs apart, you can feather edge that trench out. Unless it's super deep, then you'll want to replace it. But you can smooth that transition out. It doesn't have to be completely flat, but just smooth that little ground in spot out, and then put new sliders in there, and I can guarantee you, you'll be amazed at the ride quality difference just to doing that. But anyway, he's gonna love it, man. I had talked him into buying air shocks for the back of this car like 10 years ago, and he still has them. They're Monroe's, and that's another thing that people think air shocks are junk because they ride rough and all this kind of crap, and that's a load of crap. You know, back in the day, people used to put leaf springs on their car back in the, what was it, the late 70s and 80s, when everybody was jacking up the rear ends of their car real high and nosing the front down. Well, they'd max out their PSI in them air shocks, and they would ride really, really rough. But what's amazing is when you put like 15 PSI in a rear air shock, you will be amazed of the ride quality difference going down the highway from just a regular store-bought, over-the-counter, regular gas shock. So I'm a big fan of air shocks with a little bit of PSI in them. And the other thing about the air shocks on these cars in particular is if you're going to plan on going on a trip and you load it down with suitcases and luggage and all that kind of stuff, and possibly be taking 2 more extra people, that's more weight in the rear, you can put a little bit more PSI in the shocks and it'll still ride good. You know what I mean? It's only when you really get really high up on the PSI on the air shocks, that's when they start riding rough. But I can tell you from personal experience, I took off a pair of over-the-counter shocks, put on air shocks, and that was a 56 that I drove every day. And it was my true deal daily driver, a 56 4-door Bel Air at the time. I was amazed at the ride quality difference, and I had 15 PSI in them shocks. I was blown away, man. So anyway, there you go, in case you didn't know that. A little bit of things for you. Now again, guys, when I'm telling you stuff like this, this is personal experience stuff. This is not stuff I watch somebody on YouTube do and me try to play it off as, you know, oh, that's the way you do it, just because I watched a video. That's from personal experience. So you can argue all you want. You're not telling me anything because I did it. You know what I mean? So it's amazing how people, they've never run air shocks, but they'll tell you they're junk because they ride too rough and they never owned a set. You know what I mean? But I do remember my brother's, I think it was a Chevelle. He had a 71 Chevelle. I remember that thing rode rough back in the early 80s because he had the air shocks on the back and it was jacked way up. I think he had big old fat Kragers on that car too, big old tires that wouldn't fit under the wheel wells, so that thing did ride a little rough then, but hey, that was popular back then, you know what I mean? Times have changed. Now Steve does want the front of this car down a little bit because it's always set up in the front. No doubt when we put new leaves in the back, it is going to be probably, it's definitely going to be higher than what it is now, but anyway, so I'm gonna lower it down a little bit, and he's gonna love it. I'm telling you. Pretty excited. I gotta get to work.